Greetings and welcome to a very special edition of the Downingtown Area School District's Career Cafe program. Today we have with us Pete Ferrantello, propane technician from XPress Energy. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited actually to have an opportunity to come in here and explain the industry a little bit. I know that when I was growing up, I never had the opportunity, as we're presenting it today. I kind of learned on the fly, so it wasn't anything that I had already thought about ahead of time. So I hope that I can get the juices going.
I'm very excited to have you, and I'm sure our audience is as well. Pete, talk to me a little bit about exactly what it is that a propane technician does.
Okay. Propane is used for different applications in the house. It could be either simply for your barbecue grill, which comes in this little tiny white bottles that you usually see at the stores. They're attached to your barbecue, or they can go typically for a house supply, 1,000-gallon underground tank. The challenge there is to find a place where we can legally put the tank in the ground according to codes and run the line over to the house and make our connections there from that point. And we have to make sure that the pressures are good enough for the appliances that are inside the house. It's very important.
Talk to me about, not that there would be like a typical day per se. I think that's something you and I have covered in our sidebar conversations, that one of the things that you love about the job is that there is no typical.
Exactly.
But what is a typical day for you, Pete?
Well, it is. That's what keeps this job very interesting. I don't have a typical day. So, but I do know for the most part what I have in store for me for the day. Now, I may have to do a couple of installs. I will try to do my homework a little bit prior to going out there. We do something called a site visit, which is my job. A customer may call up and they may want whole house heating, for instance. I will show up and I will look at the configuration of the property, determine what they need as far as tank size is concerned, and pretty much how we're going to run and supply that gas. And along with that, doing that, we do something called a PA1. So if it's a buried tank, or even an above ground tank, if we have to bury a gas line, we do a P1 call, which goes out and they all come out and mark the lines for all the electric and the water and sewer and all that stuff, so we don't cross that path. That could be very detrimental to the installer. So it's and they'll do it for free. So it's kind of foolish not to have it done.
Right.
Even for a homeowner, if they're not even doing propane work, they're just doing work. Do it. It's a safety feature. So anyway, so my jobs can come up with different, I mean, it could be emergencies that come up. I could be on a job and there may be a gas leak. The customer may smell gas. Gas is an odorless gas. They do put an odorant in it just in case there is a leak. You can smell it, identify it, and they are instructed to call us. In fact, if they suspect that there's a gas leak, we always instruct them to turn the tank off, always kill the supply. The one thing about propane versus natural gas is the propane is a very heavy-ended product, and it lingers and it travels down to the ground. Natural gas is a light gas, and it goes up into the atmosphere. But the difference being is that with propane, you have a container. So if you have a 100-gallon container, if there was a gas leak, you know that once that 100 gallons is used up,
it's done.
It's done, exactly. The natural gas is just an endless feed from the street. And so there's different types of properties with the gases, but predominantly do the same thing.
How does one become a propane technician, Pete? What sort of training or background do you need?
Well, interestingly enough, I had absolutely zero intention on getting into this field. My history was when, prior to my wife and I having children, I had started working for a fuel oil company as a delivery driver, and the children were born. Now the responsibility fell on me, and So I needed to do something a little bit more than what I was doing there. And I enjoyed the actual physicality of the driving. I enjoyed it. It was, you know, I had an area that I took care of. I did all my routing and stuff like that. But, you know, you have to think about your future. And I didn't want to be in a career that was just limited to just being a driver, because I felt like, well, it's not specialized enough.
Right.
And I didn't want to have my job ever being at risk for the fact that anybody can come in and take it. So while I was working for the company that's unfortunately no longer in business, we were bought out. But prior to that, we had a service technician that was retiring. And they were looking to get another service tech, and I thought, you know what? Maybe that's something I should do. And as much as I enjoyed doing what I was doing at the time, I thought, well, it's something else I'm throwing on my resume. So it made me a little bit more in demand. So my first step into it was the agreement that they agreed to they liked me, which is always
It's always a plus, right?
yeah, it's always a plus. So they agreed to send me away to training. I did that, and it was basically for fuel oil, because that's what I was familiar with. I had never touched the propane side of it. It was one of the things that I had no desire to, because a lot of people have a phobia or a fear about it because it's something that you cannot see.
Right.
And I think it's the same correlation. Like, you can see that whole thing with electric. People are afraid of electricity because you can't see the electric. So a buddy of mine said, listen, Pete, you need to try it. See what's, you know, he was a delivery guy, so I got into the delivery side. So I thought, all right, now I did fuel oil tech, I did some of the propane delivery, and then that went to getting into the service side of it. Well, once I became more and more familiar with it, more and more I loved it. And it was...
You'll forgive the expression, but it's like a slow burn, right?
Exactly what it is. It was a slow burn, but it was something that intrigued me tremendously. So as far as the education was concerned, you'll get they'll send you for basic information. But I have to tell you, it's very important that, and in my case, I took a lot of my own time. A lot of what I know is all self-taught. And I would spend weekends and I'm reading books, and so I was familiar with one aspect of it, but you don't want to go out to a location and figure, okay, well, I know this part of it, but what happens if something else happens on
Right.
this side? So I approached it with start to attack the things I didn't know. So it helped me round off everything, and I spent a lot of time, probably a little bit nerdy, doing what I do, but it absolutely helps me along the way. I mean,
Well, it's how you know you have a passion, right? It's like you want to be doing it in your off hours, and you want to find out everything you can about it. And
they know.
Yeah.
My children know. So I'll even take it a step further. I mean, even on weekends, what I'll do is I get up before everybody else. I'm usually up at 3:30 in the morning, which is an ungodly hour. Don't ask me why, but that's the nature of me.
And I thought my 4:30 wake up was early. Man, you got me beat.
But I get up early, so I need to be active. And what I'll do is I will bring my truck into the driveway. I'll strip it down. I'll reorganize it, because I know I have a week proceeding that's who knows what I have in front of me. So to go back to what's my day like, I don't know.
Right.
But I want to be able to know that I have every component that I may need for that particular job. So if it's an emergency, or if it's just a straight install, then I'm prepared to do whatever I need to do. And I don't want that uncomfortable feeling of fumbling when I'm out there. So that's part of what I do. But that's how I ended up getting into it. Now, there's also certain aspects of it, too. We are obliged to follow the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Agency. It's a governing body that governs our industry, amongst other industries, but we are required to do all of our work according to their guidelines. We
Right.
can't deviate from them. They are telling us that we can only put a tank 10 feet away from an electric source. Well, I can't say, well, you know what, Mrs. Jones, the chances of something happening are fine, don't worry about it, we'll let it go. That would be bad, because if something bad happens, then the onus now falls on me, because I'm the trained technician.
Right.
The homeowner doesn't know any of these guidelines. Most of them, and some of them do. But it's my responsibility just to educate. And so that's part of what I do when I get out there. Not only am I supplying maybe for the first time, and in most chances it is the first time they have propane, I'm also educating them on the process of the propane, how it works, how different regulators work feeding their house, what to look for in case of an emergency, what to do. They have my phone number, call us, we're there 24/7. So it's basically what I do on a daily basis, including the weekends in case there's an emergency. So.
Pete, what advice would you give to somebody looking to break into this industry?
Well, I would say this. This industry is a great industry. It took me years of finding my way. And everybody has a different passion. Everybody has a different interest level. I tried everything. I've been a business owner. I've tried doing different aspects of work. And I just look at it like, well, you know what? You throw it out there. If you like it, then you stay with it. If it's not something that you really like, then you move on. You know, you're not married to anything.
It's trial and error, right?
It is trial and error, and you don't know that. So for somebody that may be interested, I would say this. When I was a kid, I was always, I like working with my hands. I was always grabbing something.
Is that an erector set?
This is an erector set.
That's awesome. I used to play with one too.
This is old school, and you can tell it's old school because the kid's wearing a tie. So I don't know what this was taken, but what I do is pretty much the same thing. It's putting pipes together like an erector set. And it's cool because it's not the same. It's always a different deal. So, and it's fun. I mean, it's a challenge. It's not a monotonous job. So if somebody's
It's like a lot of problem solving, right?
It is. It's a lot of pride, and you feel good about it. If somebody doesn't have if they don't have heat, or there's a problem with a component, with the regulator, you know, you're there to determine what it is. And a lot of it's done through experience. I understand that, but there is a format that you go through. Your experience does pay off. I do certain things a certain way, certainly a lot different than any other techs that are out there. But I have a passion for it, and I think my results show it. I'm a very strong stickler of making sure that the job is clean, making sure that the homeowner has an understanding that I know what I'm doing. And it's also an industry that needs people. And I could tell you this much, we have always gone through a series every year. We're always looking for help. The problem is we don't have that pool of people to grab, and it's a very difficult thing. So we do have guys that have been in this business that really, quite frankly, shouldn't be. And whether it's their work ethic or whether it's their knowledge or the lack of passion for it. And you don't have to have a passion for the job. I think you should have a passion for everything that you do, that you like. I mean, it certainly helps. But we do need people. And it's a good guarantee. And I'll say one other thing. We had a recession not too long ago. A lot of people had lost their jobs. And it was very satisfying to know that I was never going to be in danger, because people always need heat.
It's true.
So you have a lot of people that are working out in the fields, different fields. They're getting laid off. The foreclosure rates were extraordinarily high. And yet every day I still was going to work. So it makes you feel good that way. I support a family, and we have a good lifestyle. So if for somebody that's interested in it, if you like working with your hands, it's not boring. It's not hard. I mean, once you know it, it's, you know, everything is Greek when you don't know something.
Right.
So once you get the understanding and the comprehension of it, and I tell the same story over and over again to people that I'm training. I don't care how long it takes you to do a job. Take your time, You do it right, it's clean, you walk away from it, and you're not going back.
Right.
The worst part is having somebody hurry up, hustle, get the thing done, they leave, there's a phone call, my system's not working, there's a leak, I smell propane. You go there, there's pipe dope on all the fittings that they put together, and you just look at it and you're dumbfounded by the fact that, you know, how can you walk away from this job the way it is? So I say, take your time, and then if you have any questions, you know, I'm a phone call away. So if I'm training you and you have any doubts, it's why we have phones. You know,
Right.
So it's a good field in my opinion. I think it's a great field.
Well, we're very grateful that you've come today to share it with our students. I have one more question before we start getting into a lot of the really awesome things that you brought with you today that I'm looking forward to explaining. And I ask this of all of our guests. Pete, take yourself back in time. If you could grab 17, 18-year-old Pete Ferrantello by the shoulders and tell him one thing, what would it be?
You're not going to be a professional baseball player. That was where I thought I was going to go. I actually tried out for the Phillies when I was younger, and long story short, I'm here talking about propane.
Right.
So I didn't have the talent. It's tough. I remember when I was in school, one of the things that I really felt that I missed was the guidance. I had no clue, none. I just knew I was going through high school. I graduated. I didn't have a direction, and I just started doing different things, but I didn't have any particular road. I was just throwing it out there. I started selling cameras. You know, I started doing, you know, I had a million jobs, and none of which was anything substantial. Oddly enough, I think for anybody is commit yourself. Give it a shot to see if you like it. You know, you're always going to be, at the beginning, it's always something that's a little bit scary, but when you start to feel comfortable with something, you have to, you know, and if you don't have a passion for it, if it's not something that you look forward to doing, I look forward to going to work. I mean, I enjoy it immensely. It keeps me occupied. I think I'm trying to, if you are somebody that's not, I was too fidgety. And if you're not somebody that wants to be relegated to sitting behind a desk all day, then you got to be out and about. And I owned an antique store, and that's where I met my wife. But one of the hardest things for me to do at that time was to stay in the store all day. I was like a caged lion. I just felt like I'm just waiting for somebody to come to
Get me out of here. Yeah.
It's tough, and so you have to have a certain personality type, and you have to have some sort of a common sense factor. I mean, you're going to go there. All the training in the world is not going to help you get through a lot of stuff, but you figure it out. You sit there, you figure it out, and that's where the satisfaction comes in, when you know that you've just figured out something that nobody else knew how to do. So for somebody that's young, and you like the activity end of it, it's not a busy, it's not a hard business. It's just that your dedication, and it will show. So hopefully, if you're that young, the way I was, I wish that I had this program available to me at the time.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I really do. I'm very envious of all the young guys, but it's and girls. The girls want to get into it, but it's a great opportunity, and I think that I mean, I didn't know anything about propane. You know, even in a business, I mean, why would you know, other than you turn it on? So yeah, that would be my suggestion. Try it, look into it, and again, I'm always available to answer any questions if anybody ever needed to reach out.
I was about to say, and you've got at least one helpful adult that's willing to help you out. So
yeah, definitely.
So Peter, you brought a whole bunch of stuff. Please, take me through it.
Okay. Well, the first thing is, our end result is, my thing is that when we do different things, and I brought some photos of some jobs that I did. This is a regulator connection, and it supplies the gas to the house. And it's the way that propane works is that a lot of people are not familiar that propane is a liquid. Propane goes in the tank as a liquid. There's various sizes of tanks. They're just containers is all they are. There is a small barbecue bottle. There is the large 1,000-gallon tank. There's some that are above ground, some that are buried, but propane is propane. Propane is a liquid, and it's very, very cold. It's negative 44 degrees.
Oof.
So you don't want the liquid to be on your skin. You have to be very cognizant of the fact that it's a very explosive gas. So you cannot treat it with a cavalier attitude. And when it goes in the tank as a liquid, it vaporizes, and it goes through the piping system over to the house. Whether the tank is away from the house, you'll have what they call a two-stage system. Inside the tank, you have over 150 pounds of pressure, which is a lot of pressure. Remember, this is minus 44 degrees. This is a highly explosive gas. And so you need to be careful about how you handle it. So what happens is you have 150 pounds of gas pressure. It goes through the first stage of the regulator.
Nico, do you want to bring that over to us, please?
And all a regulator does is restrict flow of gas. It doesn't produce flow. It's more of a restrictor, if anything else. So I put together a little model. I designed this strictly for
Thank you.
really teaching people how to do leak checks. But let's pretend that this is the house, and this is your wall, and coming out of your wall you have what they call a standpipe or a nipple. This is a stub out. So let's take 1/2 of this. Let's pretend that it's a 1,000-gallon tank. This side doesn't exist. We're just looking at this. You have your tank, which would be located buried or above ground away from the house. You have 150 pounds of pressure. It goes through a little line like this called a pigtail that would be connected to this. This would be in the dome of the tank if it's underground. That knocks it down to 10 pounds of pressure. So you're going from 150 down to 10.
Wow.
It's now sending 10 pounds over to the house, which is your second stage. Inside a residential house, most appliances run off of what they, about 1/2 pound of pressure. So you're 150 pounds down to 1/2 pound. That's a big disparity between the two. So this knows that it needs to restrict the flow, and it sends it in accordingly. Now all the house products, everything that you own, run off of something called BTUs, which is a British thermal unit. It's just a measurement. You calculate your BTUs of all the appliances that you have, and then that determines the pipe size inside the house. It also determines the pipe size outside, but you usually will supply enough to the house to get that. The regulators supply a certain amount of BTUs. So you have to be aware of what appliances are in the house, what appliances that you may have in the future. So if I'm running my pipe size and I have just enough to cover a heater, a hot water heater, anything else, a stove. Let's say, for instance, they want to add a hot tub in the back. Well, if I don't have the right line size, I now have to get creative to create that flow. The tanks are available, like I said, for different applications. Most of the tanks that you see are above ground tanks. I do have a photo of that, and this is what most people are familiar with once I can locate it. They are generally 100-gallon tanks. The capacity is a little larger. It's done in water columns, so it would be 120 gallons of water column. That's if you were to fill it up at 100%. Propane does expand. It'll expand in the heat. Most of the tanks that you see are white, so it doesn't draw the heat. You only fill to 80%. 80% of the 120 tank, which is your standard tank, would give you 100 gallons. So this is an install that I did here, and you'll see that this has two 100-gallon tanks. In between the two tanks, there's this long version of this pigtail that goes from tank to tank. they'll both drop at the same rate. So the vaporization process that happens inside the tank will now go through here. The tanks drop at the same rate. There's generally a gauge on the tank that'll tell you the percentage of 120 if it's a above ground 120, which is this. We also have underground tanks, which are they come in various sizes, but 500 to 1,000 gallons is generally that would be the norm for a house, depending on how large the house is. You have to calculate the size of the house. You have to calculate the line size to supply the BTUs, which is important. When we put in a tank, you'll see here that this is a 500-gallon tank, and it's very hard to tell, but we cover it with something called screening. So the screening, the tank gets buried, we dig a hole, it's about 5 feet in depth. So when we go down, we drop the tank down. On top of the tank, where we have the regulator and the shutoff valve and the fill, that should be above grade of the soil. Because while you dig and the tank is below, sometimes those domes, because it's covered with a dome, which is this, so this is a finished product of us burying the tank, this should be high enough where all your components are above grade, because if that filled up with water, now you're out of luck, because that could freeze. Dead of winter, you can't make a fill, and it's not a whole lot you can do, and it's quite challenging to get gas to the house, and you have to make other arrangements. So that's where the technician comes into play, where, all right, this is an emergency, let's see what we can do. When we bury a tank, we bury to a certain depth. We have different types of lines that you can use. So way back when, they used to bury a lot of copper, and the copper lines that they would bury.
Can you take us through those, actually? I think you brought a few.
Yes. So we have different types of gas line here. This is the old type. That's still allowable inside the house, but it's not allowed to be buried. This is an uncoated copper line. And it won't allow you to do that because it will rot away eventually, create a leak, potentially be hazardous. So that's no longer available for us to bury. We have now two types of lines that we can bury that's allowed. Now you can bury an uncoated copper line if it goes through some sort of a conduit that protects the line, but it's a lot more work, nobody does it.
Right.
We have now available to us a coated copper line, which is this. It's the same thing that I just showed you, but it has a little plastic coating on it, so obviously it'll protect you from the elements. This line here is pliable, so you can bend it to whatever size or shape that you need within reason without kinking it. This is what we can put through a wall that has any kind of mortar. The mortar mix itself has acid in it, so we need to protect it against that for obvious reasons. The other line that we use for burial is this poly line, which is a plastic line, which is really the most preferable line that we have. This will last until the sun burns out, as long as it's not exposed to the UV. So what we do is we run a poly line in a trench. We ultimately bury that trench, but at the other end, we have this little thing called a flexible riser. So this little flexible riser serves for a couple of purposes. So this is a 3/4 inch line we have available in a 1/2 inch line. This is for a 1/2 inch line. This goes in through the bottom of the dome. This comes up at the top. This comes off. Nico, can I have the gas line? Yeah. And the 1/2 inch poly line comes up.
This goes on?
Yeah. And what we do at this point is we chamfer the end of it, which means that we put a bevel on it. So how this is put together.
Ooh, I gotcha.
So at the other end, we feed it through here. this eventually will come out and bevel. And there we go. So all this is just a protective sleeve. So obviously the gas line's going through this protective sleeve. This is still protecting it from the UV. It's also metal inside here for protection. If this was outside the dome, maybe around the house. And then this piece here is what they call, it almost looks like a shark bite. There's a little rubber O-ring in here. You slip it on. I don't want to do that now because I won't be able to get it off.
Sure.
So what you'll do is you have to bevel this edge because it tapers it to allow it to slip through the O-ring that's in here. Once you put that on, you're never getting it off. That gets screwed onto the bottom. And on here is where you make your attachments to your regulators that go over to the dome. So this is a preferable gas line to use. Now we also have gas lines that we use inside the house that are not permissible for burial, even though they are protected and they are metal. This is what they call corrugated steel. Corrugated steel is corrugated steel. It's exactly what the name is, but it's also referenced as CSST. If you can see through, it's got a lot of corrugations. The reason why this is used inside is because it has the flexibility factor to it. If we're doing any kind of gas line, we have to run the gas line maybe above a drop ceiling, or if we have to go up and down from pipes and around rafters, we have that availability to do that. So with this, even though it's protected, it's definitely not, it's this very thin layer that this will eventually rot away. Now, I've come across jobs where I've seen it buried, and that's not good. So this is part of what you do when you go to a job. You assess what you're looking at. I mean, I've had a lot of jobs that I've showed up at, and you have to inform the customer right away what they're looking at and what the possibilities are, and you have to make some changes. So I have some examples here that I want to show you. This here is one that I came across, and right away I could tell you that there's one.
Now, is that the corrugated steel line that's buried?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, wow.
So you have corrugated steel. That's not good. That's the first violation. Second violation is that this is a black reducing nipple. Anything outside for gas has to be this, which is a galvanized nipple so it doesn't rot. So that's your second violation. The third violation is, this goes to that NFPA code book I was talking about. There is an electric appliance right here. This should have been vented away, and it has to be vented away at least 5 feet from that appliance. It's buried twice. You can see the corrugated steel here, here. This is the other violation. The vent wasn't there, and really for a service technician, it should have a service valve down here, because if we ever had to do a leak check, we can do that. I want to show you what I'm talking about with the leak check. So once I'm done doing a job, and I want to make sure that it is leak-free, and it needs to be 100% leak-free. You can't have a small, tiny leak and say, oh, Mrs. Smith, it's fine, you're okay, it's just a little tiny leak, because
It's got to be a closed system.
it's got to be a completely closed system. It also has to be tested for a certain duration of time, so you can release it and let them work with it. So on each regulator, you know, all the new ones have this. They have a little test port, and that test port is designed for testing for leaks. So as an example of that, when we're done, and I want to find out what the issue is, then I have what they call a manometer. I have a fitting that I put on this regulator. There's different types of manometers. There's different types of gauges that I'm using. So I know that this is a 10-pound system. I'm taking my high pressure gauge. I already put a Schrader valve on, which allows me to attach this. This goes on here. I will pressurize it to a certain percentage. I will turn off the gas, This will be open to the house, so I want to test everything all the way through. I'll hold it, I'll set my timer for 3 minutes, and if it holds, then we're good to go. If there's a leak, then I've got a problem.
So it would depressurize if there were a leak.
It would leak, it would show a drop in pressure, and how we test it is a couple of different ways. So let's say that we know that there's a pressure drop. And now this is my worst nightmare, because everybody has a certain part of the job that they hate. This
Right.
is the one I hate, because it could be anywhere in the system. I've had very challenging leaks that I've had to locate. Sometimes you can locate them very simply. We have a spray bottle which has a leak detector in it. Because it's pressurized and it's pushing out through wherever that leak is, when you spray it down, it bubbles up, and it'll allow us to see where that leak is located. Sometimes you can't find them. Sometimes we don't know that for sure, because it doesn't, either the leak is very, very minute, it's not allowing us to show any bubbles, or it could be on a certain fitting that's too large where it's not condensed. So then I go to my trusty tool, which is what they call a sniffer. A leak detector, which is an electronic sniffer.
So it sniffs it out, right?
It sniffs it out, and it's a lifesaver. And I've used this on many occasions. This is your probe. You simply turn it on. It takes a while for it to recalculate. And all I do at this point is I just go along each joint to determine if there's in fact a leak. Sometimes you have to be careful about where you're probing, because, as I mentioned earlier, propane's heavier than air. So I might be getting a hit down here, but it may not be here. I'll have to probe up, because it might be coming here.
It's coming down.
Dropping down. So I've walked into houses where this started beeping almost immediately. So it has a little, this particular model has a little ticker on it. Well, it's not done zeroing out, but it has a little ticker on it. It acts kind of like a Geiger counter. It'll just tick, 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 and then once it hits it, tick, 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 and
Yeah.
then it'll scream like a steady screaming sound if you've hit the jackpot. So at that point, what do? Well, you got to kill the gas. You have to dismantle what you can to that point and hope for the best. Now, this little mock-up that I did has something right where your hand is called a union. So this union allows me to break it apart here and start to dismantle things. You can't put this particular mock-up completely together with a hard pipe, because it's impossible to do.
Right.
So I have to have a union here. But you always think ahead. When you do your installs, you have to have as many service valves as possible, because I need to isolate things. I might have a system that's leaking, and I'm starting from an underground tank, and now I've got a leak somewhere in the house. All right, well, I've got a lot of piping. What do? I'll close one side, I'll check it, still leaking. All right, then I'll try to close them down, and you narrow it down that way. And I tell you, when you're done, you celebrate, because sometimes it's very tiring, especially if you have to go all the way out to the tank. You got to go all the way down to the basement, back out to the tank, back to the basement. So it's a tedious thing. So that's why I always emphasize, when you're doing this type of work, take your time. Make sure that you do it correctly, because it'll play havoc on you if you don't and haven't prepared yourself. So there's one thing that I always try to tell my children, and it's one of the phrases, and I can't even say if I know for sure if it was Ben Franklin, but it's failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And you have to live by that. It's just an incredible, when you think about what that saying means, it just gets you out of a jam almost all the time. You're ready for whatever is in front of you, and you have to think on the fly. Like a lot of the stuff you have to, but at least I have the basics with me. I know I have components. I know I have this or that to get the job done, and it'll give you a lot more confidence going in there. And it's something that I've always lived by. And there's one other thing that I have always said to everybody that has ever worked with me. There's two words in the English language, and the words themselves are fine, but when they're put together, it tells me one thing. When somebody uses the phrase that is good enough, you've just told me that it's not good enough.
Right.
You just told me that you didn't do the best job possible and that you're just getting by on what it was. And if you eliminate that from I feel, if you eliminate that from your personal life, that you're going to find that everything else that you do, you set your standards a lot higher. So, and I try to tell everybody, if I hear somebody tells me that it's good enough, I don't want you working for me. You just put an end to that. So I think that people need to, everyone's going to conduct their life and do their own work ethic, but you have to be proud of what you do.
You only got one go around, right? You might as well go for the best.
You have to. You have to. So there's other things that we do. I mentioned earlier about venting a gas line away from any source of electric. So that would be very important. And how we do that a couple different ways. We have a vent line, which is that we choose to use, which is called Seal Tight, and it has a couple of different adapters to it. This is just a plastic. It's usually used for electric. I prefer to use it for the venting simply because it is flexible and I can cut it very easily to whatever length I have. Here's an adapter that goes on one end. This is a male thread. I have two of these. This will go underneath the regulator. It'll fit right on the bottom of that. It screws right in. This will slip on. And then at the other end, this gets attached, so that's underneath the regulator, and at the other end, you have this, which is a cap. And this is allowing it to breathe without bugs, spiders, and all that other nonsense, because once you plug up that vent, that regulator's not breathing, it chokes, and you have an issue inside the house.
Right.
But this is what we use to keep things going. And we have other things. I mean, I have every tool. Now, I'm going to say one thing. This is my personal choice. When I have my tools, I like my tools. My tools is my livelihood, and it's very important, in my opinion. I am a professional, so I try to get the best tools available. I don't go to the bargain basement. I don't look for the secondhand tools. If you're just starting out, tools can be very pricey. I understand that. And so you work your way up to that level. There is a difference in quality of tools. So when you work with good equipment, you seem to work more efficiently, and you're not wrestling with yourself with it. But I do another thing with my tools. And people ask me all the time, on each one, this is a little beaten up because I've used it, but I have tape on each one. Now I have a different marker tape on each one. And all that does is I have two of these. This is a 14-inch wrench that I have two of these in my bag. So when it's in my bag, I can identify that I have two of them without pulling all my tools out. And each one has a different color code. Now, that's my preference, but...
And your name is etched on it, right?
I do. I etch my names because they are expensive. And I don't want any problems with my tools. I oil my tools once a week too, because you want your tools to be at top performance. You don't want dirt and anything else that's clogged up in there. But the thing about the tools is that you have to be able to be ready for the next job. And if you don't keep track of your own tools and you show up and you're missing something, well, you could be dead in the water. The other thing is, we use something called a flaring tool. This is used in the industry. So we take a copper line and we attach these. It's got a little flare, it's got a little flare nut. Now, there could be a stub out, and I have that here. Yeah, the fittings. Yeah, the fittings for that.
Should be in the box.
So this is a coated copper line. We can pretend that this is the tank coming from the tank. This is going over to the house. This would be a nipple sticking out of the house. And then there is a flare connection. Yes, there's a flare connection. Thank you. It gets put on the bottom of this, and this is how you get your connection to the using your gas line. So this will eventually screw onto the bottom. Let's pretend this is in here, this is going into the house, and now I've made a connection of gas going in. How we make this little flare, it's a fluted end. So we're taking a straight piece of copper, we take a cutting wheel, we cut it to the size that we want, we take our flaring tool, it has different sizes listed on it, and all we do is we put the copper through, clamp it down, and we turn this wheel and it just flutes it to the right size that we need. We've already put our nut on. I can't say that I haven't done this without putting the nut on first. I got this beautiful flare now, I can't get the nut on.
Right.
So hopefully you look around and see if anybody's looking. And then you quickly cut it again and put another one on. So this is important, but I carry a second one on my truck because if I'm out in a job and I've had it where these have broken, I can't flare without this flaring tool. So I keep a backup. There's certain tools that I keep a backup.
I was about to say, in addition to quality, you need some redundancy built into your system,
Yes,
right? And
exactly.
having the right tools is key.
I think it's extremely important. But I want to show you a couple examples of what I come across because you never know what you're going to see when you show up at a house. So I was called over to a customer's house, and this is one example of this mess. So we have two regulators. This is out of code because it's just an old regulator. It was failing. There's just a lot of things going on here that just was not right. I took it over and I redesigned it, and now
It seems much simpler.
it's a lot simpler, but it's also a lot cleaner looking.
Right.
I mean, this is your home. You don't want this scrappy looking mess at your house. Now the other thing is, if you are doing an installation at a customer's house, and I don't want to pick on the women, but the women are the ones that are a little bit more afraid. Guys have a tendency of more of a cavalier, it's fine. But the women are the ones that are a little nervous about gas.
Can we say cautious?
Yes,
All right.
exactly. So if I'm doing an installation and it looks like this, I got to tell you, it doesn't instill any kind of confidence at all. I mean, to walk away from a job that looks like that is in my opinion, ridiculous. I don't know how you could feel good about it.
Well, you're putting your name on it, right? So
So if you stamp it, this is what you're stamping right here. So that's one example. There's another example here, and this is the code issues that I was talking about. You'll see here that it's got the black iron is starting to rot out, and it's got some other issues there. This was a problem because it was leaking. That's how I was brought into the scene, and I had to repipe it, and I redid it, and this is now what it looks like.
it looks much cleaner.
Well, it's a lot cleaner. It's a lot, well, it's leak-free.
Right.
So, I mean, you really have to have your priorities is what you're looking for. You can be creative with jobs. Here's one here that this is feeding the house. I also put a T on it with 2 shut-off valves. Remember, don't be shy with the shut-off valves because now I can isolate things, turn stuff off if they're not using it. Again, it looks a little bit complicated, but it's this goes back to the erector set thing we're talking about, right? So you're sitting there and it's fun. I mean, you're putting this together, and before I put all my finishing touches on it, before I marry on one fitting to another, because you're going to use what they call pipe dope, which goes around the threading so it doesn't leak through, I mock it up. So I put it on without any pipe dope. I loosely put it together so I know that my sizes are correct. And then once I figure out that this is where I need to be, I'll then go back, pipe it up, and do it the correct way.
It's that planning to succeed piece, right? To twist your words a little bit, that if you've got a good plan in place, then you can effectuate it. And if you don't have it, then it's not going to happen.
It is, and a lot of this stuff is you don't know until you get into it. This is one that we've done, which is a commercial setting. Well, I take that back. This was new housing, but they're using meters. So I had nothing but gas line. What left me was the yellow poly line on the ground, so I had to do this whole setup. This allows for 3 different houses, 3 different meters. It's strictly there for billing purposes. Now you know who's using what gas. They do have shut-off valves, so you have to put the shut-off valves on. This is one other application that I did with this was at a country club. This was for a paddleball court. They had 8 different heaters underneath the paddleball court. And
oh, wow.
I had to put together what they call a manifold. But when you're done with this type of work and you look at what you accomplished, it's a good feeling, you know. And the thing is, though, it's like I said, it's your stamp, it's your name, it's your reputation, and I think if you have that mindset, if you're young and you're getting into this business, you're going to go very far. You have established yourself as you go through. You're not going to be a genius when you walk in. There's so much to absorb. But if you understand the basic principle of propane, and you understand that your work ethic is very important, that you're going to go somewhere with it. And I hope that it's an inspiration for someone to think about. I mean, I never had any clue. I didn't know about any of this. I didn't know about putting pipes together. I didn't know about what a regulator does. I don't know about the different sizes of tanks. And it's cool stuff. I mean, it really is. And I think if you get off to the right start, and that's what I'm excited about with somebody that's getting into this field, just to pay attention. You know, pay attention, but spend some time on your own other than work. I mean, I clean out my truck on the weekends. I don't get paid for it, but you know what?
It's how you get paid.
It's how you get paid, yeah, and it makes my life so much easier during the course of the week. You know, slowly as the week goes on, the truck gets a little sloppier and sloppier, but that's why I do that. And you know, I can look at it 2 different ways. I could just be. Did I show you the picture of the truck?
No.
This is a service van. And this is an actual service van from somebody, and I want to talk about organization. So you need to be prepared about what you're going to do. So, as I said, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. This was a photo I took of a service van that had its doors open, and I got to tell you, to ask somebody for a particular part out of this is almost impossible.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
and that is not the van that you showed me that you keep outside. I mean, yours is meticulous and organized. And
well, and I tell you, if this guy shows up at my house, I don't want him. Because he's telling me the kind of work that he does. I mean, if you're racing through and you're unorganized like that, so it's important to lay the path work. So you show up, you have everything organized, you're going to have your doors open at some point, customer's going to see in there, and they're going to think, okay, and then you end up doing your work, and it's nice, everything's plumb, you have piped up, you've wiped off, you've cleaned it, they look at it, they now have confidence in you that, all right, this guy knows what he's doing, and I feel very safe about it. You can walk away from it. So you need to know that if you're getting into this business, A, you're going to have employment. It's a pretty good, safe, sound bet that you're always going to be employed if you do all the stuff that you're supposed to do, if you do clean work, if you study and know what the difference is in different situations, and it's an attitude thing.
Wise words for anyone entering any profession.
Yeah.
Pete, I want to thank you so much for being with us and being so generous with your time today. Folks, if you want to reach out to Pete, how can folks get a hold of you?
Well, they can reach me. I am located at XPress Energy. Nick, do you have a card? Yeah. And you can text me, or you can even call me. I have a cell work phone. I have to read it off of my card. However, it is Pete F. at XPress. Now that's spelled with an X, P-R-E-S-S, energy, pa.com. Or you could reach me on my cell phone, which is 610-809-2495.
And we'll make sure to put up a graphic of that so folks at home watching.
More than happy, and I have such a great time here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
for letting
much.
me come in.
That'll do it for us on this very special edition of the Career Cafe. Signing off, Dr. Troy Podell, Pete Ferrantello. Have a wonderful rest of your day.